Over the last 2 years, India's neighbourhood has not just simmered, it has boiled over. From Dhaka to Kathmandu to Pakistan's volatile frontier, 2024 and 2025 have turned South Asia into a belt of unrest where protests erupt without warning, governments fall overnight, and anti-India rhetoric becomes political currency. Sheikh Hasina's dramatic ouster in Bangladesh shattered a once stable flank. Nepal's streets exploded with Gen Z fury that toppled a sitting prime minister. And Pakistan lurched yet again into a terror-triggered military crisis that flirted with escalation before pulling back from the edge. Add Chinese footprints deepening across borders, radical narratives bleeding into the streets, and treaties hanging by threads, and India now finds itself ringed by uncertainty. With 2025 drawing to a close, and with elections, water treaties, ceasefires, and interim regimes converging in 2026, the question is no longer whether the neighbourhood is unstable, but whether India is ready for what comes next in the year 2026. Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. Across 2024 and 2025, India's immediate periphery has undergone regime changes, violent protests, border confrontations, and ideological radicalization, all unfolding at once. Bangladesh is navigating a post-Hasina vacuum under an interim setup hostile to India. Nepal is grappling with political collapse and revived territorial assertiveness. And Pakistan remains trapped in a familiar cycle of terrorism, retaliation, and fragile ceasefires. Each crisis is different, yet all feed the same reality. India's neighbourhood-first policy is being stress-tested by instability, external interference, and domestic upheavals beyond its borders. As 2026 approaches with elections, treaty deadlines, and unresolved conflicts looming, how does India brace itself for a neighbourhood that no longer pretends to be calm? Bangladesh is the epicenter of this regional churn, and its aftershocks are being felt most acutely in New Delhi. The August 2024 ouster of Sheikh Hasina did not merely remove a long-standing partner of India, it dismantled an entire framework of predictability. In her place emerged an interim government under Muhammad Yunus, overseeing a political environment that has grown openly hostile to India. Banning of the Awami League from the February 2026 elections, the rise of the anti-minority sentiments, and re-emergence of radical political outfit Jamaat-e-Islami have combined to turn Bangladesh into India's most complex strategic challenge since 1971. This is not just political instability. It is a realignment of narratives, alliances, and street power that places India squarely in the crosshairs. The streets of Dhaka in December 2025 told the story more vividly than any diplomatic cable. Massive anti-India protests erupted following the death of anti-India leader Sharif Osman Hadi, with mobs targeting symbols of Indian presence and influence. India's diplomatic missions came under attack, forcing New Delhi to suspend visa services and harden its public messaging. The interim government summoned India's High Commissioner, accusing New Delhi of sheltering Hasina, who had fled to India after her ouster. Radical groups marched openly, demanding her extradition and threatening India's northeastern states with ominous rhetoric about the Seven Sisters. This was not fringe anger. It was organized, vocal, and politically mobilized hostility unfolding just months before a critical election. Layered onto this political chaos is a deepening communal crisis that has direct implications for India. Since Hasina's fall, attacks on Hindus in Bangladesh have surged, driven by political reprisals, Islamist radicalism, and local power struggles. Thousands of incidents were reported in the immediate aftermath of August 2024, including temple vandalism, home burnings, and targeted killings. Through late 2024 and into 2025, new waves of violence emerged, with lynchings, mob attacks, and intimidation becoming recurring headlines. December 2025 saw renewed clashes after the killing of Hindu businessman Dipu Chandra Das, prompting minority protests accusing the interim government of failure and complicity. For India, this is not a distant humanitarian concern. It is a combustible mix of refugee risk, border instability, and domestic political pressure that bleeds straight across a porous frontier. The strategic stakes are compounded by geopolitics. China's expanding infrastructure footprint in Bangladesh, including sensitive projects like the Lal Monir Hat airfield near the Siliguri corridor, adds a hard security dimension to the unrest. Pakistan's defense ties with Dhaka quietly growing. Trade worth $14 billion and projects like the India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline hang in the balance, while the renewal of the Ganga Water Treaty looms in December 2026 without formal talks underway. What was once a relationship anchored in history and cooperation is now hostage to street politics, external influence, and an interim regime struggling to assert control. Bangladesh is no longer just unstable, it is unpredictable, and unpredictability is the enemy of strategic planning. Nepal, meanwhile, has followed its own path into turbulence, but the implications for India are no less serious. The unresolved border dispute triggered by Nepal's 2020 map claiming Kalapani, Lipu Lake, and Limpiadhura has refused to fade. In August 2025, Nepal's parliament condemned India's reopening of Lipu Lake trade routes agreed with China, sparking protests and renewed diplomatic friction. This is not merely a cartographic disagreement, it is a symbol of Nepal's broader assertion of sovereignty, amplified by nationalist politics and Beijing's expanding influence through Belt and Road projects. Notes issued by Kathmandu featuring disputed territory signal that the dispute has hardened, not softened, as 2026 approaches. Then came the political collapse. In September 2025, Gen Z-led protests erupted across Nepal, driven by anger over corruption, governance failures, and a controversial social media ban imposed by the CPN-UML government under KP Sharma Oli. The protests escalated rapidly, forcing Oli's resignation and the dissolution of parliament in a move widely criticized as unconstitutional. An interim government under former Chief Justice Sushila Karki was installed, with elections slated for March 2026. For India, the spectacle was unsettling. Mass unrest in an open border neighbor where political volatility can translate quickly into migration pressures, economic disruption, and anti-Indian narratives weaponized by domestic actors. Anti-India sentiment surged alongside the protests, fueled by long-standing grievances over the 1950 treaty, memories of past blockades, and the unresolved border dispute. Social media amplified nationalist and monarchist rhetoric, creating a volatile mix of identity politics and foreign policy resentment. While India maintained diplomatic engagement, even attending the interim Prime Minister's swearing-in, the underlying risks remain stark. An open border that enables trade and people-to-people ties also allows instability to spill over with alarming speed. Nepal's internal reset has not resolved its strategic ambivalence. It has merely paused it, with China's presence looming larger in the background. If Bangladesh represents political volatility and Nepal reflects sovereignty-driven friction, Pakistan remains the perennial security flashpoint that refuses to stay quiet. The April 2025 Pahalgam terror attack, which killed civilians in Kashmir, triggered one of the most dangerous escalations in recent years. India responded by expelling diplomats, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, and launching strikes on terror camps on the 7th of May. Pakistan retaliated with heavy shelling in Poonch, killing 16 before a ceasefire took hold on the 10th of May. For days, artillery fire echoed across the line of control, with nuclear risks once again hovering uncomfortably in the background. Though after Operation Sindoor, a fragile normalcy settled in by late 2025, nothing about the situation is resolved. Terrorism in Kashmir persists. Key bilateral agreements like the Shimla Agreement remain suspended, and the ceasefire is more of a pause than peace. Pakistan itself remains unstable, rocked by protests over economic distress and civil-military tensions, with its leadership leaning heavily on familiar external narratives to deflect internal anger. The prospect of US mediation under Donald Trump in 2026 adds another variable, one that could reshape diplomatic equations without addressing the root causes of instability. Across Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan, a common pattern emerges. Domestic unrest feeds anti-India rhetoric. Political transitions create openings for external actors, particularly China. Borders become pressure points, whether through migration, militancy, or symbolism. India is not facing one crisis. It is facing a synchronized neighborhood churn where multiple fault lines are active at once. This is the defining strategic reality as 2026 approaches. China's role is the silent multiplier. From infrastructure projects in Bangladesh to Belt and Road investments in Nepal and the entrenched China-Pakistan axis, Beijing is exploiting every vacuum created by instability. Ports, airfields, highways, and political influence networks are embedding themselves deeper into India's periphery, turning local unrest into strategic leverage. These are not isolated moves. They form a pattern of encirclement that amplifies every protest, every regime change, and every diplomatic rift into a larger strategic challenge for New Delhi. India's neighbourhood-first policy, built on engagement, connectivity, and goodwill, now operates in an environment where goodwill is contested and engagement is politicized. BIMSTEC remains a crucial platform, especially as a means to bypass Pakistan. But even multilateralism cannot substitute for stability on the ground. Security dialogues, development projects, and diplomatic outreach are being tested against raw street power, radical narratives, and interim regimes struggling to govern. As 2026 looms, the risks converge sharply. Bangladesh faces elections that could further radicalize politics alongside the unresolved Ganga Water Treaty and persistent minority violence. Nepal heads into polls with a fractured political landscape and unresolved border disputes. Pakistan's ceasefire hangs by a thread, vulnerable to the next terror attack or miscalculation by Islamabad or particularly Rawalpindi. Each timeline intersects with India's own security, economic, and political interests, leaving little room for complacency. The challenge for India is not to react louder, but to prepare smarter. The last 2 years have made one thing clear. Instability in the neighborhood is no longer episodic, it is structural. Protests are not anomalies, regime changes are not exceptions, and anti-India narratives are not fringe phenomena. They're becoming normalized tools of domestic politics across the region. India must brace for a future where managing instability is as important as preventing conflict, where diplomacy must operate alongside deterrence, and where neighborhood policy is inseparable from national security. 2024 and 2025 have stripped away illusions of a calm periphery. What remains is a volatile ring of neighbors navigating their own upheavals while pulling India into their turbulence. The boil is real, the pressure is rising, and the stakes in 2026 could not be higher. The only question that remains is whether India treats this moment as a warning or as a rehearsal for what lies ahead. Thank you for watching Statecraft.